Why was she smiling? That's what Private Ezra Lang kept asking himself. 8 seconds, that's all it took. 4 bodies dropped before anyone understood what they were seeing. The woman from the med tent, the one they called Goldilocks, the one with blonde curls catching Syrian sun, stood in the courtyard with a rifle that shouldn't have existed in her hands. Blood soaked her uniform. Dust settled around her boots. And she moved with a violence so smooth, so practiced, it rewrote everything. But 12 hours earlier, none of them knew. 12 hours earlier, Sergeant Colin Drake had laughed at her. He'd watched those delicate fingers organizing IV kits and made jokes. He had no idea he was mocking one of the deadliest assets his unit would ever know. No idea at all. And that's where this story begins. Not with gunfire, not with glory, but with silence, with underestimation, with a woman who knew exactly what they thought of her and chose to let them think it anyway. Camp Sentinel was already burning by 6 in the morning, not with fire but with heat, the kind of heat that makes men pray for night. The forward compound sat wedged between red hill ridges and no man's land near the Jordanian border, dust everywhere, diesel fumes, and quiet dread hanging in the air like something alive. The med tent sat just past the motor pool, small, canvas walls, basic supplies, nothing special, nothing important, that's what they thought. Inside, she moved like water. Lena. Blonde curls tied back, soft frame hidden under oversized scrubs. To everyone watching, she looked civilian, harmless, maybe even fragile. Her boots were too big for her feet, her uniform hung loose, but her eyes told a different story. Cold, black, still. They belonged to someone else entirely, someone trained to see what others missed. She sorted morphine with hands that never trembled. 48 ampoules, 6 emergency units, 1 vial missing. She didn't just count, she recited, like a metronome, like someone trained to audit under pressure, like someone who'd done this in places where mistakes meant death. Outside, Sergeant Drake leaned against a tent pole, arms crossed, fresh-pressed uniform, not a spot of dirt, not a scar. His promotion had come from connections, not combat. Everyone knew it. But he wore his rank like armor anyway. He watched Lena through the entrance and smirked. Princess over there probably never even scraped a knee, he called out. Loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to get laughs. And they laughed, they always did. Corporal Brent Mallory chimed in next. My niece could do more damage than her and she's 7. More laughter. Private J. Tolan, young and trying too hard, added his voice. She cries during Disney movies, I guarantee it. The jokes kept coming. They always did. But none of them noticed. None of them saw how Lena kept her back to the wall, how her eyes tracked exits between supply crates, how she positioned herself with clear sightlines, always aware of angles, always ready. She didn't flinch at their words. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just moved, silent, precise, coiled. And her silence made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't name. To most soldiers at Camp Sentinel, Lena was just a civilian contractor. A glorified volunteer. Her soft voice and quiet posture screamed non-threat. And that was exactly what she wanted, exactly what she needed them to believe, because underestimation is a weapon, and she knew how to use it. Dr. Byron Kessler made it his personal mission to keep Lena in her place. He was a field medic with a spotless resume and an ego that filled rooms. Combat boots from a fashion outlet, he muttered during briefings. Probably bought them because they looked tactical. He said it with authority, with certainty, like he knew. But what none of them noticed was how Lena positioned herself during every interaction. Clear exits, usable objects, lines of sight. Things most people never think about unless they've been trained to. Unless survival depends on it. They called her Goldilocks. They mocked her walk. They mimicked her voice when she wasn't looking. But Private Ezra Lang, quiet and observant, saw something different. She lifted a 60-pound crate without flinching, he whispered one night to his bunkmate. And yesterday she identified a helicopter by sound alone. Civilians don't do that. His bunkmate just smirked. Sounds like someone has a crush. Maybe. But there was someone else watching too. Chief Medic Ava Bledsoe had 3 tours under her belt and 0 patience for nonsense. She didn't laugh at the jokes. She didn't join in the mockery. She watched. She counts morphine like she's logging an operation, Ava muttered to herself one afternoon. This girl's no volunteer, and I want to know what she's hiding. Where others saw fragility, Ava saw discipline. posture, micro-adjustments, awareness of sight lines, things no civilian should be doing, but Lena did them unconsciously, like breathing. Like muscle memory, Ava didn't say anything yet. She was cataloging, building a picture, waiting for the pieces to fit together, because something about this quiet woman with blonde curls and soft voice didn't add up. Something wasn't right. And in a combat zone, things that don't add up usually mean danger, one way or another. The days passed. Heat pressed down on Camp Sentinel like a physical weight. Routines continued, patrols went out, supply convoys rolled in, and Lena stayed quiet in her corner of the med tent, counting supplies, checking inventory, staying invisible. But she was always watching, always listening, always ready for something the others couldn't see coming. And then Tuesday arrived. Brutal heat. 43 degrees Celsius on the compound just after 2 in the afternoon. The kind of heat that makes thinking difficult, makes reaction time slow, makes soldiers sloppy. That's when the sirens erupted. What happened when the sirens screamed? A supply convoy had hit an IED 11 kilometers out, casualties inbound. That's all the initial report said, but Lena knew what it meant: shrapnel, arterial trauma, maybe amputations. The med tent snapped into controlled chaos instantly. Soldiers moved with practiced urgency. Equipment was prepped, stretchers laid out, blood supplies checked. Lena was wiping dried blood off a stretcher when the first Blackhawk came in low. Rotor wash tore at the canvas walls. Sand and dust swirled through the entrance. She stepped back to her usual position, back against the load-bearing frame, eyes on the entrance, but something in her shifted. Her shoulders squared, her weight balanced. Her black eyes weren't wide with fear. They were locked onto the triage line like a combat tracker scanning for patterns and movement. The first Marine charged through the flap carrying a stretcher. His voice cracked under urgency. Incoming, one down, femoral breach. It was Ezra Lang. The same private who'd once mocked her was now barely conscious on blood-soaked canvas. His leg was torn open, bone exposed like white-hot truth. The Marine at his feet shook his head, arteries wide open. Bird medic did what he could, but he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what that meant: minutes, maybe less. Dr. Byron Kessler turned pale. His hands fumbled at the table. Clamps. Where the hell are the clamps? His voice cracked like glass. Call a surgeon. This is beyond field capability. Ava moved to stabilize. Other medics scrambled. But Ezra's vitals were dropping fast. Blood pressure plummeting. Heart rate erratic. He had minutes at most. That's when Lena moved. She didn't shout, didn't panic, didn't ask permission. She just stepped forward, deliberate, calm, unshakable. A tactical SATCOM unit poked from her cargo pocket, military grade, encrypted, not something a civilian contractor was supposed to carry, but in the chaos no one noticed. Step aside, she said quietly, not loud but final. Everyone froze, even Kessler. The woman they'd mocked for weeks was gone. Her voice was still melodic, still soft. But now it carried something else underneath. Authority, command, the kind that comes from doing this before, from saving lives when death was certain. She pulled on gloves with one smooth motion, scanned the wound once. No hesitation, severed artery. We've got 30 seconds. Ezra breathed, stay with me. Her voice was steady as bedrock. Keep your eyes on mine. You're going to be fine. I've got you. She fashioned a clamp from a carbon rod, sterilized it with one motion, locked it in place with precision that didn't come from training videos. It came from field work. Real field work, under fire, under pressure, under conditions where mistakes meant death. Her hands moved like someone who'd done this before, who'd saved lives in worse places, who knew exactly what needed to happen and in what order. The bleeding slowed. Ezra's pulse began to climb. Kessler stood motionless, mouth half open. For once in his life, he didn't know what to say. Lena was already stitching, each knot tight, clean, fast, the way combat medics are trained, the way elite medics operate. Under 4 minutes, Ezra Lang was stable, ready for evacuation. The tent had gone silent except for the soft thrum of the next helicopter approaching near the entrance. Sergeant Drake stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Where the hell did Goldilocks learn trauma surgery? His voice was almost a whisper, almost afraid. Lena looked up, met his eyes. YouTube tutorials, she said flatly. Same soft tone, same melodic voice, but now there was steel beneath the silk. Nobody laughed, nobody moved, nobody even breathed. Ava stepped closer. Her voice was low but cutting. That wasn't YouTube. That was Tier 1 trauma protocol. She glanced down at Lena's hands. Steady. Clean, already returning to rest position. You grabbed the right tools without looking. You used Delta protocols. We don't even brief those on this base. Still no answer. Lena turned back to the stretcher and continued cleaning blood like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just saved a man's life with her bare hands. Like this was Tuesday. But everyone in that tent saw her differently now. The joke stopped. The mockery ended. And they would never see her the same way again. Because you can't unsee competence. You can't unsee precision. You can't unsee someone become exactly who they've always been. As Ezra was prepped for evacuation, conscious but pale, he reached out and gripped her wrist. His voice was weak but clear. "You're not really just a medic, are you?" Lena met his gaze. She smiled for the first time since arriving at Camp Sentinel. Not soft, not sharp, just quiet. "Sometimes flowers bloom in battlefields, Ezra," she said, "but they're still just flowers. To most people it wasn't a confession. It was poetry. But to Ezra, to Ava, to anyone paying attention, it was something else. A warning disguised as metaphor. And it stayed with him long after the rotor blades lifted him from the courtyard and carried him toward safety. The rest of that day shifted like smoke. Subtle, almost invisible, but everything had changed. Why did she stay? That's what Ava couldn't stop thinking about. After Ezra's evacuation, after the adrenaline faded, after the blood was cleaned and supplies restocked, Ava watched Lena move through the med tent like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just performed emergency trauma surgery that most field medics couldn't do. Like she hadn't just revealed training that didn't exist in civilian programs. Lena went back to organizing IV kits, back to counting morphine, back to being invisible. But she wasn't invisible anymore. Not to Ava, not to anyone who'd been in that tent. The next morning, Drake didn't make jokes. Kessler didn't offer corrections. Mallory and Talon kept their distance. And Lena, she went about her work like she always had. Quiet, efficient, unbothered. But something was happening beneath the surface. Encrypted chatter started crackling through command lines. Increased movement in the ravines. Intercepted frequencies. One name kept repeating. Vulture 3, Sunrise, overlap all sectors. To most soldiers it sounded like static, like noise. But to Lena Marin it sounded like war. She knew what was coming. She'd heard this pattern before in other places, other wars. And she knew Camp Sentinel wasn't ready. The compound's defenses were adequate for raids, for skirmishes, but not for what was building in those ravines. Not for what those intercepted frequencies meant. She could feel it, the weight of it, the inevitability, and there was nothing she could do but wait. Wait and prepare. Wait and hope that when the moment came she'd be fast enough, good enough, lucky enough. That evening she sat alone outside the med tent. The sun was setting behind red hill ridges, orange and red bleeding across the sky. It was beautiful, almost peaceful. Ezra's blood was still under her fingernails. She'd scrubbed 3 times, but traces remained, physical evidence of what she'd done, who she was. Private Lang approached slowly, still bandaged, still pale, but walking. He sat down beside her without asking. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he broke the silence. "I knew you were different," he said quietly, "from the first day. The way you moved, the way you watched everything. I just didn't know how different." Lena didn't respond immediately. She watched the sun disappear behind the hills, watched shadows grow long across the compound. "Different isn't always better," she finally said. "Sometimes it's just lonely." Ezra considered this, then nodded. "Thanks for saving my life." She turned to look at him, really look at him. Young face, scared eyes trying to be brave. He reminded her of someone from another life, another war. "You would have done the same," she said. He shook his head. "No, I wouldn't have known how. That's the point. You knew exactly what to do. Like you'd done it 100 times. Maybe I have," she said softly. "And maybe that's not something to admire." There was weight in her words. Sadness. The kind that comes from seeing too much, from carrying too much, from being too good at things that shouldn't need to exist. Ezra wanted to ask more, wanted to understand, but something in her expression stopped him. Some boundary he knew better than to cross. So they sat in silence as darkness claimed the compound, as the temperature dropped, as the stars began to appear, and neither of them knew that in less than 12 hours everything would explode. Could anyone have stopped what came next? The siren screamed at exactly 0630. Not a drill, not a test. A real alarm splitting the dawn like a blade. Within seconds, Camp Sentinel erupted into chaos. Boots hit gravel, orders flew. Soldiers poured from barracks with rifles half-loaded and adrenaline burning off sleep. The intel had been right. Movement on 3 sides, coordinated, tight, professional. This wasn't a raid, it was a siege, and it was happening now. Lieutenant Cameron Walsh burst into the med tent. His voice cracked against the rising chaos. All non-essential personnel to bunkers, move now. Behind him came Sergeant Drake, still trying to wear command like armor, but it was slipping fast. That means you, Princess, he snapped at Lena. Get to the bunker and stay out of the way while the real soldiers do their job. Lena didn't blink. She looked up from her medkit. Eyes met his, soft as ever, her voice cut like wire. Of course, Sergeant. But the way she said it, like she'd heard his threat, weighed it and filed it as a non-factor, made more than one head turn. While the med staff scrambled toward bunkers, Lena moved in the opposite direction, toward a crate in the corner. To most, she looked like she was retrieving gauze or saline. Ava Bledsoe knew better. She watched as Lena knelt, twisted a hidden latch, lifted a false bottom. Inside lay equipment that shouldn't exist in a civilian contractor's possession. A Tier 1 encrypted communications unit. Compact night vision goggles, a sidearm set in matte black foam, and a set of dog tags polished from wear. Lena touched the tags like they mattered more than anything in the world, like they were sacred. Then she stood, not hunched, not cautious. She stood tall, military tall, like gravity no longer applied to her. Marin L. Combat Medic. Ghost Watch Unit, Clearance Black Delta. Designations that didn't exist on paper, only in operations where paper didn't matter. She keyed the radio, her voice was steady, professional. Blackbird actual, this is Nightingale. Position confirmed, package secure, activating storm weather protocol, a beat. Then the reply came through static and distance. Storm rising, full spectrum engagement authorized, covers blown, show colors, no explanation, just permission. And for Lena Marin, that was enough, that was everything. At 0642, the first mortar landed. The blast shook the northern perimeter. Sand and steel and blood thrown skyward. Gunfire followed, tight, overlapping, surgical. Enemy marksmen pinned defenders in place. Machine guns shredded the fences. Command fell into chaos. Drake's voice cracked over open communications. All units, Sector 3 is collapsing. I need suppressive fire on Grid 203. No response. Too much panic, not enough leadership, not enough training for this. Back in the tent, Lena was already moving. She pulled the scrubs off in one smooth motion. Beneath was matte black tactical gear molded to a frame trained by years of deployment. Everything fit. Everything clicked into place like pieces of a machine. She zipped the final layer, strapped the sidearm tight, and from the shadows of the crate she retrieved a suppressed M110, custom optics, low drag, maximum lethality. Artillery screamed overhead. She didn't flinch. She tracked the sound. Measured velocity, timed impact. 40 meters short, she whispered to herself. The explosion confirmed it. She was right. Corporal Brent Mallory dove behind cover near the tent entrance, eyes wide, voice shaking. They're actually trying to kill us, he whispered like he was discovering war for the first time, but Lena was already gone. Between canvas walls and rising smoke, she became something else. A shadow, a signal, a weapon finally unmasked. Her rifle rose without sound. One shot, a whisper, a crack on the distant ridge. 400 meters out, a hostile sniper slumped. 3 more cracks followed in quick succession, each one surgical, each one final, center mass, non-recoverable, done by someone who'd done this in real wars, in worse places, against better enemies. Enemy snipers, men who'd spent hours perfecting kill angles, were now exposed. One by one, their positions fell apart. Someone was reading their terrain better than they could. Someone who knew where fire lanes would converge, who could read wind like it was ink on a page, who understood the geometry of death better than they did. Where the hell is that counter-sniper fire coming from? Captain Rodriguez's voice cracked over communications, panic tipping toward hope. Whoever's shooting, don't stop. You just bought us breathing room. Ava Bledsoe crouched low behind a crate of medkits. She was watching something no manual had prepared her for. The woman they'd once called Goldilocks now moved like a precision instrument, every shot deliberate, every adjustment controlled, not just a good shot. A trained one, purposeful, ruthless, effective. 4 targets down, Lena's voice came over comms, soft, almost gentle, north sector clear, shifting east. But buried beneath that quiet tone was steel. The calm of someone who'd been here before, who'd walked through fire and come out sharpened by it. Ava knew that calm, you couldn't fake it, you couldn't learn it from books, you earned it. And just like that, momentum shifted. The attackers lost coordination. Their formation fractured without Overwatch support. They couldn't press the advantage. The ghost they hadn't seen coming was carving through their strategy, one operator altering the course of battle. Then the calls for medical support came. A mortar had chewed through the outer defensive line. Private Morrison, arterial bleed. Corpsman Williams, chest wound, collapsing lung. And Lena moved again. She crossed open ground, 40 meters of chaos under fire. No body armor, no backup. Just gloves, gauze, and the confidence of someone who didn't doubt the outcome. Infantrymen ducked around her, unsure whether to cover her or get out of her way. Morrison, look at me, her voice steady as a heartbeat. You're going to make it, just keep looking at me, I've got you. Her hands worked fast, tourniquet, gauze, clamp, not guessing, not hopping, knowing she wasn't trying to save him, she knew she would. Rounds cracked overhead, dust kicked up around her knees, she didn't flinch, she kept stitching. She kept working, putting lives back together while others were still trying to take them apart. Corporal Mallory, still pinned nearby, whispered to no one in particular, she's doing surgery while we're getting shot at. His voice carried disbelief, off fear, something he couldn't name but would remember forever. And then came the rotor wash, deep, heavy, military. A Black Hawk descended through smoke and chaos. No markings, no call sign. It didn't ask for landing clearance. It just landed. And from it stepped a woman with gray hair tied back and ribbons shining through the dust. Commander Rebecca Ashworth. Her voice cut through the gunfire like it was nothing. I'm here for Specialist Marin. Captain Rodriguez blinked, tried to process. Ma'am, we only have a civilian medic by that name. Ashworth didn't blink back, didn't hesitate. Specialist Lena Marin. Delta Combat Medic, Special Activities Division. Mission complete, covers burned. The ground shifted, reality cracked. Everything they thought they knew collapsed in one sentence. No one laughed now, no one even breathed. Lena stepped forward through the dust and smoke. Dirt on her boots, blood on her gloves, eyes unreadable. Morrison was stabilized behind her. Williams was breathing, lives saved. Mission complete. She didn't smile, didn't explain, didn't need to. Commander Ashworth saluted. Outstanding work under fire, Specialist. 3 combat tour, 52 lives saved under enemy engagement. Silver Star, Purple Heart. She said it loud, so everyone would hear. So it would echo, so they would remember. Drake stood frozen. Kessler looked like he might be sick. Mallory and Talon couldn't meet her eyes because they'd called her princess. They'd mocked her walk. They'd laughed at her voice. And all along she'd been the most dangerous person on that base. What happened after the dust settled? There were consequences, official ones. Drake was formally reprimanded. His political promotion suddenly looked like what it always was, a mistake. Kessler's authority collapsed overnight. No one wanted his guidance anymore. Mallory and Talon received quiet transfers, somewhere out of the way, somewhere harmless, somewhere they couldn't hurt anyone else with their assumptions. But it turned out Lena hadn't just saved lives during her time at Camp Sentinel. She'd been studying the unit, documenting failures, identifying weaknesses, fixing problems from the inside. Her mission wasn't just medical support, it was evaluation, assessment, and most of the unit had failed her test. Before she left, Ezra Lang caught her, still bandaged, still pale, but standing. I knew you were different, he whispered. Thanks for saving my life. Lena gave a small smile, the first real one he'd ever seen from her. Sometimes the most dangerous weapons don't look like weapons at all, she said quietly. She didn't wait for applause, didn't give speeches, didn't salute the flag or shake hands with commanders. She just left a single note taped to the med tent wall. Fix your protocols and get better clamps. 8 words, that was all, and then she was gone, loaded onto that unmarked Blackhawk, dust swirling, rotors spinning, carrying her back to shadows and secrets and missions no one would ever know about. The soldiers who'd mocked her stood in the courtyard watching her leave. They didn't wave, didn't cheer. They just watched in silence as the helicopter became a speck against the morning sky, and each of them carried the same thought, the same shame, the same lesson they'd never forget. They judged her by her appearance, by her voice, by her frame. They'd seen blonde curls and soft features and decided she was weak, decided she didn't belong, decided she couldn't possibly be dangerous. They were wrong about everything, and it almost cost them their lives. Camp Sentinel returned to routine eventually. New soldiers rotated in, old ones rotated out. The med tent was restocked. The protocols were updated. Better clamps were ordered. Life moved forward the way it always does after war. But the story remained, whispered in barracks, told over coffee, repeated during training exercises. The story of Goldilocks. The story of the woman no one respected until the moment she saved them all. The story of 8 seconds that changed everything. Some called it legend. Others called it cautionary tale. But everyone who heard it understood the same truth. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Power doesn't always look powerful. And the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone's ignoring. Ava Bledsoe requested Lena's file 3 times. Each time it came back classified, redacted, unavailable, which told her everything she needed to know. Ghost Watch Unit, Special Activities Division, Black Delta Clearance. These weren't just words, they were warnings. They were proof that some soldiers operate in shadows, that some missions don't get medals, that some heroes never get their names in history books. And maybe that's how it should be. Because people like Lena Marin don't do this work for recognition. They do it because someone has to, because lives depend on it. Because when everyone else is panicking, someone needs to stay calm. Someone needs to know what to do. Someone needs to be ready. Years later, Ezra Lang would become a medic himself. He'd train at the same schools Lena trained at. He'd learn the same protocols, study the same techniques, and he'd think about her every single day, about the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she turned chaos into control with nothing but knowledge and will. He'd tell her story to new medics, to young soldiers who thought they knew what strength looked like, and he'd always end it the same way. With the same 8 words she'd taught him without ever saying them directly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That's the lesson Camp Sentinel learned. That's the truth written in blood and dust and 8 seconds of violence. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to be big to be dangerous. You don't need to announce your worth to have value. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that matters most. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who saves them all. Sometimes flowers do bloom in battlefields. And sometimes, just sometimes, those flowers have thorns sharp enough to cut through anything. Lena Marin was never seen at Camp Sentinel again. Her name disappeared from rosters. Her file vanished into classified systems. And somewhere in some other compound, in some other war, she's still working, still saving lives, still being underestimated, still being exactly who she's always been. A weapon disguised as softness. A warrior wrapped in silence. A reminder that strength takes many forms, and the most dangerous ones are the forms we never see coming. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.